Welcome to Mpowered Living. I'm Sheu. On this podcast, innovative leaders and visionary experts share insights and practical tools for work, family, and marriage. Each episode, we'll explore how to elevate your life while staying grounded in what truly matters to you. You're working hard to navigate relationships, build a thriving family, and create a legacy of purpose. We're here to help you do that with confidence and intentionality. So if you're ready to live a life by design, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Mpowered Living. I'm your host, Sheu, and my guest today is Allison Hare. Allison is an award-winning host of the globally ranked podcast, Culture Changers, and she helps founders and creators find their voice and build platforms that create real connection and impact. In this episode, we talk about her journey from a successful corporate career into burnout and what it took to walk away and start over. We explore the early signs of misalignment that so many people ignore and why chasing success doesn't always lead to fulfillment. And Allison shares what it really takes to reconnect with your voice, including how to move past people-pleasing, develop your own point of view, and show up in a way that feels authentic and aligned. This is an honest and empowering conversation about finding your voice and building a life that actually feels like your own. Let's dive in. Allison, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here today.
And I'm super excited to meet you, and I'm excited to be here too. Thank you.
Okay, let's just dive in because there's so much that I want to talk to you about. I know that you spent so many years climbing the corporate ladder, and then you made this decision to walk away and to start something from scratch. What did you start to notice internally that told you that it was time to make a change?
God, it was so, I did walk away from my corporate career. I left on purpose without a plan. I don't really recommend that approach, but I was profoundly burned out. And I worked in corporate sales. So I worked for DocuSign, Salesforce, ADP for the better part of over 20 years. And it came to the point, it's kind of an interesting story. Maybe a year or two before I left. This is going to sound crazy, but I stumbled on a dance class. I don't have any background in dance, but I stumbled on this class and I felt like I was struck by lightning. And not that I picked it up, I'm not that great of a dancer or whatever, but it felt like I felt this intense rush. And I remember asking myself, am I allowed to feel this good? Which is such a messed up question to ask yourself, right? But it felt so expansive, like I could spread my arms out and take up space. And it was so much joy in this experience. And I decided for fun to become a dance fitness instructor. I was so taken by this and, by this format. And it wasn't that I quit to become a dance fitness instructor. It was just like chasing joy that I hadn't felt before. And I remember, I've had this podcast, my podcast, since 2019. It's called Culture Changers. And it felt so expansive when I would be on this mic and when I would be on the dance floor. It was like a crack that I couldn't get enough of. Whereas it felt really expansive. But when I would sit here and I'd be on work calls and I would look and I'd be like, all right, it's 2:55. I've got 5 more minutes. Okay, I can get through this. It was so constrictive. It felt really was the feeling of, is it a yes or a no feeling in my body? And, I could fake it for as long as I could. And it felt like this mask just kept falling off no matter how hard I kept trying to put it back on. And it was almost like a ringing alarm of like, something has to change. You can't do this forever. And for me, it turned into panic attacks. I'd never had those before. And, when you have a panic attack, sometimes it can appear like, oh my God, I'm having a heart attack, where I'd be awakened out of my sleep and wonder, am I going to wake up alive? It was really frightening where something had to change. So for me, it was like my body yelling.
Yeah. What were the early signs that maybe, because, most people don't wake up and all of a sudden they're at this extreme burnout, and there are signs along the way that I think we often miss. So can you talk about those signs that maybe aren't as obvious?
Lord, those signs started when I was a teenager, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom of 6 kids, and she would beat it into our heads, me and my sisters, never rely on a man to make money, always make your own. And so she did not make that choice, and felt really stuck. And she and my father got divorced when I was a teenager. And, she lived her life with a lot of chronic illness. She did not have money, felt like she was flat footed. And so it was so important for her, for us to get jobs and to be self sustaining, and in my brain, it was like workaholic clicked on. My father was a workaholic as well. And so watching my mom struggle and suffer, you know, after this, I'm like, that will never happen to me. And I went completely the opposite direction of overworking. I had struggled with disordered eating and body dysmorphia in my 40s, like to I guess have some sort of control over my body. My mother, when she kind of divorced and fell into this fit of depression, she got extremely overweight because she was taking antidepressant meds that, kind of essentially blew up her body. And I was like, that will not happen. But some kind of switch went off where I was like, I have a degree in broadcasting, and I really wanted to be a DJ out of college, like a radio DJ. That was my dream. And I remember sending these like really crappy demo tapes to radio stations on a stack of pizzas with my resume on top, like hire me. And they laughed and were thankful, and they're like, no thanks when they heard it. And I think in all points of my career, I always had this desire for speaking, for being on the microphone, for broadcasting. And I remember even in college, I remember sitting in my voice and diction class, and the first time I spoke in front of a room, I felt like all the lights in my body turned on, where I didn't know what my thing was. And so at that time I was like, I know this is my thing, but what am I going to do with this? How am I going to use this as a force for good, essentially my voice? I knew there was something there, but at every turn in my professional career, I picked the money and I went into sales, and I went into hardcore sales. First I started in marketing and sales, and it just got more and more and more. And so I would have these passions on the side that I would do Toastmasters. I ran a blog, a music blog. I would interview and promote emerging artists. I would have these kind of flirting with speaking, but never going all in. And it was always like a fun thing on the side. And then I launched my podcast, and it just became more obvious. Like, this is where I feel the most alive. And how do I feel more alive? And so it was, those flirtations came early. I just ignored them and picked the money and security.
But I mean, it's such a common theme, right? Like we are conditioned to believe like, go be successful, and that means make a lot of money, and then you will be happy.
Yes. I find that even I'm 51, and I left my corporate career at 47, just starting over from scratch, had no idea what I was going to do. And I remember I made one decision when I left, and then I was going to make no decisions until I get to hear my own voice. And it took months. And I did all kinds of crazy stuff. Like I would do psychedelic assisted therapy. I would do 12-hour walks and solo overnight hikes. And I am in the process of doing, like the top highest 48 highest peaks in 48 of the lower US contiguous states. And it just took forever to like deprogram. And as I was kind of coming out of this burnout and like figuring out what am I going to do next and connecting with people that had stories, like I really thought like I couldn't make it. I don't know how all these people are like not burned out. And turns out everybody is. And then we have a pandemic, and there was like this collective burnout, and this common story is me as a Gen Xer, or even, elder millennials and millennials, that, there is a lot of confusing messaging around you can do and be everything you want as a woman, but also you need to be skinny, beautiful, be demure, don't be too loud, all of those things. So it was like confusing messaging, where that message of like never rely on a man to make money, always make your own. And also within the confines of what does it mean to be a woman and a working woman
It's like that
or a
scene from
mother.
Barbie.
That scene from what?
Barbie, the movie Barbie.
Yes. Yes.
So you talked about trying a lot of things to help you find your voice. Which ones were the most effective? Like, if you were to suggest one to the listener, what's the one that you would say, start here, try this. This will really help you. What's the word you used? The program.
Deprogram. Well, I think, I'd worked with a personal brand strategy firm first when I was trying to figure out where do I go from here? And the messaging that I thought was really astute was always you are best positioned to serve the person you once were. And so, where can you be of service? So, when you think of mission driven people, I imagine, Anne, that people listening to your show, these aren't people that want to clock in and clock out of a job and it's just a job. Like there's a purpose on this earth, right? What does that purpose mean? And so part of it is asking yourself, where can you serve? Like what do you know that you wish other people could know? And kind of peeling the layer. And I think for me at that time, I wanted to help people like me, burned out working moms that were trying to figure out their own voice again. And so part of it is, and what I do now. So I'm a podcast strategist full time, and so I work with founders, coaches, consultants, speakers, and authors, helping them find their voice. Believe it or not, Anne, most of my time is not spent teaching people how to podcast. Most of my time is spent welcoming them back home to themselves. And what that means is that when and you could think about this not just in podcasting, but your presence on social media, if you're showing up in a certain way, if you are writing a book, a lot of times it's natural for us to mimic what we hear out there. You listen to Mel Robbins or Ann Sheu, you listen to Jay Shetty, you listen to Lewis Howes, and you're like, wow, that sounds really, really good. It's natural to kind of model yourself after that, but it never works. It never works because it is not your voice. And so part of the deprogramming and conditioning is how do you really feel? I always say that when you hug the middle, your show and your content becomes forgettable. What is your point of view that is yours? What do you have opinions about? It doesn't mean that you have to be Andrew Tate and be super offensive, but there are ways to share what you feel, especially when it comes to making a difference of what is the opinion that you have and starting there of like kind of dipping your toe into having an opinion instead of trying to please everybody will always connect you so much faster than trying to please everybody and go too broad.
Yeah, let's talk about that, pleasing other people, because I think that for a lot of our listeners, that is something that we've kind of fallen into the trap of doing, right? Spending our entire lives doing the things that we're told to do because we think this is how it is the most helpful or what other people want. And so, what is your advice? Like, how would you coach somebody to really move forward with confidence so that they are doing what is right and what feels authentic to them and not what everybody else is expecting or wanting from?
It's so insidious, actually, how much the people pleasing is kind of baked into kind of the societal expectations of us as women of being pleasing, whatever that could mean. To you, it really is insidious. I think the easiest thing to do is to actually have an opinion and share it. And you can do it in ways that are respectful and dignified. You don't have to be in offense, but like having a point of view makes a big difference. So part of like dipping the toe in maybe something on social media, it may be thought leadership, it may be understanding what you see that doesn't sit right with you. I think for me, I'm somebody who is left leaning forever, especially when I call them corporate overlords. I would never express, my political opinions. I really am. It's not that I'm careful to do this. I literally don't like demonize or like group people into wrong or bad or whatever, like I kind of blame the leaders, you know, and I'm betting on us as people to connect, you know, like I have a lot of people in my circle that don't agree with me, but we love each other as humans. And that is like the hopeful aspect of it. And I think there are ways to just, you know, like for me, I always kept all that stuff under wraps because I was afraid that people would know that I believe this and then they wouldn't want to work with me. And then it felt almost suffocating because, you know, when things like, I'll just use the things that went on in Minneapolis, right? So there's something that happened and that was so fascinating. And there were apolitical influencers, people that are lifestyle influencers, had huge followings, would never talk about politics or political affiliations. Like people don't come to them for politics. For them, they can be escaped to find whatever handbag or watch them unloading their dishwasher or cook something. It's like super calming for people, you know? And at some point they said, I can't do this. I can't sit here silently. They have this platform. And some of them picked a side. And certainly there were people that said, hey, I'm done. That's not what I came here for. And the people that did understand and were kind of neutral about those people doubled down on them. And then they grew their following. And there are studies that show that apolitical influencers are far more influential in politics than political influencers. Because if you have a trusted audience, they're coming to you. They're people that you've probably followed for years, you know, like just they're lovely and they're pleasant and they're fun and they're entertaining. And maybe you learn stuff and they make you laugh and you've been with them since 2019 or 22 or whatever. Like they become your companion. It's like this kind of interesting parasocial relationship. And then all of a sudden they've got a position. You're like, I'm rethinking this, you know, like that does make sense. You're far more likely to reconsider something from a trusted person than somebody that is on the opposite side trying to shove data and stuff down your throat. And so I don't know. I can't help but I think we're just in a political time that it's hard to ignore of what your point of view is. But I think it is important more than ever to have a clear point of view and potentially a way forward or a place or a container or a safe place for other people to have meaningful discussions about it. So, you know, I think in my podcast work, you know, I work with people not just like I don't care as much about downloads and views, but I do care about engagement. You know, do you have an irresistible show that is entertaining, that is meaningful, that is getting people talking because that is how it grows. And that's how movements happen, right? Because people are engaging and can't help but talk about it. You got to give them something to talk about.
Absolutely. I would like to talk a little bit about your transition from being an employee and doing the sales thing and then now, you know, being on your own. Can you talk about the identity shift that was required from having the stability and this I would even say like financial freedom from the sales job to being out on your own and the courage that was required to make that move and that transition?
That courage is required every day. It is still something that, you know, I think it's kind of like when you work for yourself, like you just can't disassociate like you can at work. You have to confront it all. And so that identity shift, I think from a generous perspective, a charitable perspective, is you really get to know yourself. Like the self awareness is required to make that identity shift. And it is an everyday thing. Like rent is due every day. So I think in my brain, I love the entrepreneur. And even on the days where I'm like, what am I doing? Because that happens in any business. I always ask myself, would I want to be somewhere else? And the answer is always no. Like there's so much purpose and meaning, and it is all part of it. I think the identity aspect of it, again, I shared like I do like psychedelic assisted therapy and like kind of I'm open to exploring what is the next frontier? What do I need to learn? What does it mean? I think from the employee aspect, Again, the disassociating part is like almost a luxury.
Yeah.
That's the part I miss a little bit, but at the same time, there's so much growth and possibilities that every single day, doors open that you could not imagine. Is a journey. It is a roller coaster. I don't want to mince words about, like there is a lot of romanticism around being an entrepreneur, and there is so much beauty in it, but it is not for the faint of heart. And that is something I'm learning every day.
Yeah. I would love to talk about your work in the podcast space.
Yeah.
And I'm curious you've got this incredible resume, all this experience. How did you land in like podcast strategy work? I know you've done your podcast since 2019, but how did you kind of land in this space of all of the things that you could have picked? Why in the podcast space?
It kept coming up. And almost as long as I've been podcasting, I've been helping people launch and grow their shows since the beginning. But I was doing it undercover. I was working full time, and people would ask me, and I'd be like, all right, I'll put together a program and kind of figure it out. And some of the biggest and most beloved podcasts started from my little program that I was running. And so I was doing it undercover, kind of on the side. And I tried a lot of different iterations. And back then, 2020, 2021, 2022, I was experimenting with a lot of different formats and ways to serve in that way. And again, I left corporate in 2022. So this has been like, is this my off ramp out of corporate? What is possible with it? And at the time, I was attracting a lot of hobby podcasters and some kind of like podcasters that were like conspiracy theorists that I'm like, I don't feel good about platforming, some of these people. But at the same time, some of these hobby podcasters, it was heartbreaking for me because what I started to get obsessed with, and I just love the medium. I always have loved the medium, is why so many podcasts, like something like 90% never make it past episode 8. So you and I, we're doing good. We're doing well. However many shows you're in, you've got a lot of them. And so many don't. And a lot of my hobby podcasters did not. And I didn't quite understand at the time, like we'd get them all excited, and I'd be like, all right, it's time to let's book some guests. And they'd say, well, I have family coming in, and then the kids are back in school, and then it's the holidays, and maybe next year. And I'm like, man, what is missing here? So I started kind of getting a little bit obsessed with it. I put it on a shelf. It was kind of heartbreaking actually back then, because I'm like, why isn't anybody? I mean, there were some that did, and those are the ones that, blew up to big shows, but so many that didn't, that I'm like, why? What is missing? And it was that sustainability and also kind of being grounded in a foundation. And so when I was kind of going down this personal brand track around entrepreneur and coaching, the podcast thing kept coming up and was so easy for me to do. I already had all this stuff, and it just kept coming up, but more in the business sense. And then in 2025, I remember I was at a conference, and I'd helped some founders get their podcast launched. And their business has generated $200 million in sales. They do high ticket coaching for high ticket coaches. They're called Empire Partners. And they said that their number one trust builder is their podcasts. They're now over 100 podcasts in. And I remember going, man, I just can't seem to make these lanes work around burnout and transition coaching and all of this stuff. And I'm not even sure that's what I want to do. Oh, and the podcast thing kept coming up. And I remember Ryan, one of the co-founders, he leaned down, got on eye level. He was just looking at me eye level. And he said, Allison, this podcast thing, go all in, go all in. You won't believe what'll happen. And he was right. And so in 2025, in March, I went all in on it. I worked on 24 shows last year alone. And really my lane, Anne, is with founders like coaches, consultants, speakers, authors, personal brands. Like, building on their thought leadership, but integrating it with their business so that it is engaging, that it is growing, that it is entertaining, that it is irresistible to the right people, that it is growing their influence and their audience and their brand and their impact. Like that's my sweet spot. And so it just kept knocking on my door and I finally answered it.
What are some of the most common mistakes that people make when they start a podcast? And do you think that some people who have this like calling in their heart to do a podcast should not do it? Like how does somebody know whether I should even like I'm interested? How should I even get started? What are some of the things that they should be considering?
There are a few practical things. Like sometimes people will say, I really, really want a podcast, but they literally have zero time. And then it doesn't make sense because there is work. But at the same time, I work with 6, 7, 8 figure founders that have so little time. Like they are really, really busy, but they feel like this impact is leaving on the table. And they're like, how do I make this work? And then what we do is we kind of take a look at their calendar and say, what can we repurpose so that we are creating space for this in a way that makes sense? You can operate in seasons. You don't have to be like publishing forever and ever. Amen. It doesn't have to be a weekly podcast. It can be a limited series. It can be 5-minute podcasts. They don't have to be these hour-long, things. There's so many ways to kind of figure out how to make it work if it is a calling on you and that there is space. I would say, practically speaking, if you can allocate 2 to 3, maybe 2 to 4 hours a week, if you have a weekly podcast for like a standard thing, again, knowing that it can probably be a lot less depending on bandwidth and resources and the kind of show that you have. That's probably a good way. And if that is like stressing you out, don't do it. Maybe it's not the time. I think that when you asked about common mistakes, I would say it's two. One is sometimes people will try and put frosting on the cake before they bake it. And that can look like, I need to get in a studio. I need to have all of the cover art. Like they're doing like kind of the front end assets. They may have a half baked idea, or maybe they have a really good idea, but they're like, let me just, it's kind of like, I need to get the website. I need to, you know, make sure I've got the professional studio and the lights and the hair and makeup and the glam and whatever. And you don't need to do that, like prove out the concept first before you go spending a ton of money on the wrong things. I would think, because it's really inexpensive to start and launch a podcast. Like I could go on my phone right now and record and upload it to Spotify and voila, there you have a podcast. Is it going to last forever? Probably not. Is it good? Probably not. I think the other piece of it is the foundation of what purpose. I call it the 4 Ps, and I do this with every person I work with. And the 4 Ps are what purpose? What's the purpose does the podcast serve for you as the creator? What is the purpose? Who is the person you're serving? And I say person one. Who are you talking to? And certainly you can have like primary listener, secondary listener, tertiary listener. What is the premise? That's what most people think about. What's the show about? What is your unique position that only you can do? And the fourth thing is, what is the promise? Meaning, what does your show deliver in a almost packaged way that people can count on? Why would they tune in? What is the payoff for them? So identifying those kind of 4 things is really, really critical. Most people kind of skip through it. But if you understand that, that is the difference between a really sustainable, meaningful podcast that's structured and anchored right, where the audience is kept in mind. And so I actually had a conversation with somebody that ultimately wasn't a good fit for me to work with, which I guess is the benefit that I get to choose my clients, right? I'm not going to be a fit for everyone. And for some people, I'm going to be the best fit. And for this person, he had a podcast and he said that his only reason for doing a podcast is to invite potential clients. So it became like a pitch. And we talked about like, who's your audience? He's like, I didn't even think about them.
Mm.
And I was like, have any of your guests become clients? And he said, no. And I'm like, okay. I mean, you might as well just talk on a Zoom, right? Just you two. So
What?
sometimes just being a little more thought out about
Yeah.
it. And I would say that about any
Yeah.
content, as the thought leader.
Yeah. Why do you think that some people tend to hold back from sharing their voice? Meaning,
Oh,
if somebody's
what a
thinking about doing
question.
a podcast, maybe they're afraid to move forward. Like, what are some of those fears that might be in the way, some of those blockers? And then I think this question applies like um, even more holistically if we're just talking about like not willing to speak up, not
Yeah.
willing to share your voice.
What a beautiful question. And this comes up a lot. And even with the most confident people that I've worked with, there's always a little bit of a, am I really doing this? I think what comes up often, and again, it's part of the people pleasers, that it is so common to worry about the people that may judge you. Who does she think she is? And it is so natural. It happens to all of us. It is so natural. And I find this even just being in a sales role, that when you realize that what you have to offer is so life changing, that you're literally blocking the impact and the transformation and the change. You're literally blocking people from finding you because you're worried about Linda in accounting, who's never going to buy from you, you know? Or even sometimes people worry about their mom hearing a story, and there are ways to say things without saying things and like protect the people that you love. But I will tell you, when my mother passed away, my show got a little more, and my mom would have been delighted by what I would say, but it did add a different level of spice, I think, that I may have been holding back that I didn't realize, you know? It
Yeah.
always is kind of like an onion unfolding. I imagine it's probably like that for you, Anne, that you think like, couldn't be more vulnerable. And then you realize there is so much I'm holding back. And so it is the journey of like peeling the onion. There's so much marrow in it. But once you kind of get out of your own way, sometimes you really need to figure out the impact that you want to make. And when that becomes the service piece of you delivering that, and the full expression of yourself becomes almost like a self generating energy. Because when you say the thing and it lands, and then you hear people say, oh my God, me too. I did a podcast episode recently about, are women getting too skinny again? And so we see, and it can be controversial. I mean, I like to thoughtfully deconstruct fiery topics. We talk power, politics, religion, relationships, sex, all those things.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like a contradictory, complicated discussion around people that we see, GLP-1s, Ariana Grande, Nicole Kidman, Demi Moore, Kelly Osbourne, just people that are literally shrinking in front of us again. It was common in the 90s. Then we had a moment where body positivity and Lizzo and Lena Dunham were celebrated, and inclusive sizes. And now it feels like we are literally asked to take up less space again. And so I was sharing my experience with disordered eating and body dysmorphia and orthorexia. And I had so many people reach out saying, thank you so much. My daughter is has been in rehab for anorexia, and people just don't know how pervasive this is, how important this topic is. Thank you for attacking it in a way that is respectful. Thank you for talking about this. We need to talk about this more. And when you're able to have these meaningful discussions respectfully, in a way, it just opens up everything. Everything is possible. That's how change happens. That's how culture changes. When you hear something on your podcast and you're like, I can't believe what I heard, and it made me rethink something, or I'm not sure I agree with that. And they're talking about it in their own circles. That's how the world changes. And that's what impact is.
When you think about the impact that you've made and the transitions that you've made in your career, how has your definition of ambition and success
Mm,
changed over the years?
what a great question. Ambition to me, everything to me is kind of wrapped around safety. And when I think of ambitious, of like when my parents divorced, my father's from Lebanon and he left the country and my dad was gone. My dad was the breadwinner. My mom had to go back to work, with no degree. She had been a stay-at-home mom for 25 years. And ambition for me was just enough, like money, money, money. I don't want to worry about this. I don't want to worry about this. And I built up a really nice lifestyle, made a ton of money and a lot in the bank. And that felt so good. And walking away from all of that, we're a two-income household, and walking away with so much ambition, always so much ambition. The definition changes. So certainly there's safety and security. I think that's kind of the fear piece of where it came from. And ambition for me now is more impact driven, but there's still a practical piece in it that I am always actively working through. And it doesn't matter, like, even when I look back of like having a ton of, predictable money coming in and looking back at that and thinking I was still super worried about money, always. So all of it has been like, I just have money crap, like
Yeah.
it's just
Don't we
something I'm
all though?
actively
Don't we
working
all?
with. What?
Yeah. Don't we all?
Some people are really relaxed and healthy about it. And I'm like, what is that like? It doesn't matter what's in the bank account, but I'm like,
Yeah.
help me understand because that
Yeah.
sounds fun. And
Yeah.
so maybe that is it. Maybe it is freedom and being relaxed about money and ambition and knowing that I don't have to do, I can just be, and that I am enough as I am. And that it's just an ongoing thing.
So, as you're talking about this fear, the question that's coming up for me is how do you know the difference between the healthy fear that's actually protecting us and the
Yeah.
fear that is holding us back from being our best selves?
I think again, it's an ongoing question over what is healthy. I think at some point, I believe that burnout is the misalignment of your true desires and what you do every day. And what I discovered, and especially when I, uh, I remember this really vividly, and this will answer your question. After I'd left my corporate career, I'd started this coaching business and was trying to figure out, like, how do I make money? How do I do this? How do I find clients? This was before the podcast stuff, podcast strategy stuff had come on. So I was in kind of a low point. And I decided I was going to go to do the tallest peak in North Carolina. And it's like a 4-hour drive from me. I live in Atlanta. It's called Mount Mitchell. And on my ride, I went by myself and I was going to go solo and hike it. It's like almost like a vertical hike. It's really rocky and rooty and, whatever. But on my way, I was listening to podcasts and I was listening to audiobooks, and everything I was looking at was all like personal development. And I noticed everything says how to fix, stop doing this. When I was looking at the personal development, I was like, wait a minute, nothing made me feel better. I thought like, well, maybe this is the one. So I have this long drive. I'm like, maybe this is the one that'll solve my problem or kind of scratch this itch for me. Maybe this one will be what I need to release. And I was like, no, I'm not broken and I don't need to be fixed. And I turned off the radio completely. I turned off all the audio. And all of a sudden, I felt this calm as I saw the mountains come closer and closer to me. And I'm like, I am not broken. I don't need to be fixed. All of us that experience burnout, I have just outgrown my container. And so when you realize that it feels as kind of like a sweater that's a ratty sweater that was really comfortable, what gets you here won't get you there. I think it's when those old tools that you've been using forever just stop working, and then it's time to grow. And so I think of it as like being in an egg, right? Like when you're like squished in an egg and you start to see the cracks, and those cracks, what you see between them is like fractures of light. Like if you push on it, you realize there's more space and there's more opportunity there. And when you push on it, it's really scary, right? But at the same time, you realize there's something else out there for you. And I think that is the beauty of like expansion that, yeah, it's scary and it doesn't feel right. It's kind of like a new baby deer legs, but there's so much out there, but you can't stay in the same place. And it requires a new set of tools, which is why it's great to like hire a coach or get involved in a community or try something new. And I think the more new, like I'm kind of a neophyte. I love learning. I love discovering things. I love experiencing new things and kind of being out in the world because your brain is just open to possibilities versus closed to no possibilities.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, I would love to do a couple rapid fire questions.
Okay.
That
Yeah, let's do it.
habit that helps with alignment.
For me, it's always nature and movement.
A mindset people need to let go of.
Scarcity.
A book that's changed your life.
Mirror in the Earth by Asia Suler. Mirrors in the Earth by Asia Suler.
And one question people should ask themselves more often.
If I do this, will I be abandoning myself?
Thank you. Allison, it has been such a joy having you on the show today. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with me and with the listeners. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you would like to share? Anything that you would love to leave with the listener?
Well, I so appreciate these thoughtful questions and I appreciate this time so much to talk to your listeners. I think, everything now has to do with alignment. And I think we're in a crazy time politically in general. And I think more than anything, the more you connect with others and create emotional safety, whether it is not only for yourself, but with others, I think that is how we get through kind of some tough and uncertain times. For me, like I said before, I don't really bet on the leaders. I'm betting on us, but it requires us to get out of our isolation or feeling like people pleasing, right? I don't want to ask for help. And sometimes it is just finding somebody that will make you feel heard and seen and being that person for others, and the world changes.
Love that. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Empowered Living. I hope today's conversation sparked some inspiration and gave you tools to live more intentionally in your family, work, and life. If you enjoyed our episode today, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an inspiring story or actionable takeaway. And if you know someone who would love this episode, share it with them, because living an intentional life is better when we do it together. Until next time, remember, the life you want doesn't happen by chance, it happens by choice. Let's keep creating it one step at a time.